Guys, welcome to another episode of Under the Influence podcast. We're here with myself, Dilesh Popat, who's a recovery worker at Turning Point, and Jas at the Seek Recovery Network. Been doing this for a little while now, but today we've got a special guest here, my old manager, a very good friend of mine. And bear in mind, we used to work together quite a lot, closely with what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about rehab and detox and some of the stuff Amy does. So what are you doing nowadays, Amy? I know you was my old manager, but what is your current role?
So currently for Turning Point, I'm managing anything like inpatient detox. So not community detox, inpatient. And we do that, we have a contract with The Level. If people don't know, it's in Nottingham. So it's its own kind of centre. It's gone are the days where it was like at the end of like a hospital wing. We've, progressed from there. So everyone that we, wants inpatient detox, as long as it's gone through our kind of processes and we think it's safe and it's right, we put through to The Level. So I manage that, and I manage rehab, residential rehab for city at the minute, not county anymore. So that's, similar, anybody that's in treatment that we feel, needs kind of tier 4 treatment, like stuff in the community isn't quite kind of cutting it, then that's what we can look at going through that process.
Tier 4, when you say tier 4, what does that...
Residential treatment.
Residential,
so community, we've exhausted the things in the community. It's just not quite, enough.
Yeah.
They need that additional support. They might need that kind of supported living kind of support in the evenings and stuff like that. So if we think that that's suitable, we can look at getting people into rehab. Yeah. And then the third thing that we've only just started from April, we've got a new contract with the council, which is a good contract, and what that's looking at doing is linking up our service users with people from the council that are already on the council list, so they'll do that kind of thing, but we won't just work with people from the council, we will work with anybody about everything. Well, we're saying that at the moment, while we can manage it. So we've got 2 support workers with lived experience who are fantastic. And so that's looking at, ultimately with some people it's securing a tenancy, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can be, if there's an eviction notice coming up, or what we've noticed that we've managed to do quite well in the last couple of weeks is living conditions, where people have literally been, there's been rats in the property and no windows and mould, like really bad conditions. And because these people are, still using, they're still actively in that place, if you say to them, well, come on, let's go ring the council and challenge them, it's not going to happen. So that's been very positive, actually. And we have had 2 people already, because this only started in April, that are already looking at new properties.
That's good.
That's really good. We've needed it.
Yeah. And I think, and the part that sort of caught my eye there where you were talking about rehab, I think with Jas and I, with working out in the community, we must get so many calls of people that are like, send my son, send my daughter, send them to rehab now. Yeah. We get that all the time. I think we speak about this all the time. Jas rings me and be like, I've got this person who wants to go rehab.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you mentioned is exhausted everything in the community. And that made me think, what is everything in the community? Because we get people that want to go rehab tomorrow, and we're trying to say, is this the right choice?
With everything like this, it is case by case. We have got kind of basic eligibility criteria, so we do like if people have, showed willingness in the community, they have gone, through our treatment pathways, whether that's opiate, alcohol, we do like to see that engagement, because some people that really works for them. And I think the other thing is tier 4 treatment isn't for everybody. Yeah. They might, desperately want it, but the environment is very intense, especially, for example, if you've got somebody that's been very isolated in their substance use for a long time, haven't had any kind of structure to their day, and then in 2 weeks they're expected to get up at 7 o'clock, do the meeting, communal cooking.
It's too much.
It's too much.
Yeah.
And but what we've, because I've been doing it for a couple of years now and getting feedback, what we try and do now is we don't say no to anybody. That's not what we're about. Everybody can change. We can all be at different stages. And this is why we're doing a lot more work with Riff Sleepers project now, because before it was like, you haven't got accommodation, you haven't got, so we can't do anything with you, and that's not good enough. So this is where the housing comes in as well. We're linking into housing. So if you've got somebody potentially that's street homeless, we could look at securing a bed before they go to detox. So you can say, okay, there's no point detoxing you and you're putting you back street homeless. What's the point? Well, we're actually just putting you more at risk.
Absolutely.
Because we've reduced your tolerance and then we've chucked you out there. So it's making those links. But with rehab, it's finding what stage you're at. So we could have somebody at that stage that we would not just put straight into rehab because we're setting them up to fail. I mean, I've seen that twice where, because it's a balancing act of risk, because some people are, really at risk and, we want to help. But at the same time, if we get them that funding and they're not prepared and they haven't had, say, a mental health assessment, so they go in, you take the substances away and they can't cope, and then they come out or it's a behavioural issue, it's very hard to get them back in. So it's a real thing of balancing their risk and their need, but making sure we're prepping them.
No, and that's one of the, when we get calls to the Seek Recovery Network, and it's usually the families, and when you suggest going to Turning Point or going to see their GP, and you talk about rehab and treatment, one of the frustrations is the length of time it's going to take to get them there.
Yeah.
But I think people don't understand the whole process, and like you say, it's almost, if they go in tomorrow, you are literally setting them up to fail.
Yeah, and we have kind of done that. We've kind of we've got to do something with this person, and it just doesn't work. Maybe one time fluke that I haven't come across yet, it will, but from our experience, it doesn't. But what we can do is we can stagger treatment. So detox before was really, it was strict. You had to really prove your physical dependency, and that's all that mattered, this kind of physical dependency. Detox has changed so much in its approach now, so we can have people that are using, so they're on a script and they're using crack every day, and so they've managed to stop using heroin, but they're still using crack. We can stabilise them through detox on their ficeptone, whereas we wouldn't have looked at that before.
Amy, for the viewers that are listening and watching this, what is a script?
So what we look to do is get somebody in a controlled substance. So if someone came in that was using heroin every day, it's safer for us to get them on a controlled substance like ficeptone or Subutex. They're the ones that we use.
Yeah.
And then we'll be trying to pitch them at the dose that keeps them okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll be reviewing that regularly, and ideally, once they were stable, because it takes a while psychologically to feel stable as well.
Yeah.
Then we would be looking at kind of slowly reducing them, and some people do it that way.
And that preparation is important, isn't it? Before they go into rehab or even a detox.
Yeah. So we detox people. What we do, and that's to keep people safe as well, is we can do, say, a stabilisation detox, and then they can have a period of time in the community on their stabilisation, on their script, so ficeptone or Esprinor, and then what we would do is we would detox them again prior to rehab, because you can't be on anything in rehab, but then they go straight to rehab, no gap. Yeah. Like you're going straight there.
And these are the conversations I get. I'm sure just earlier when at the coffee shop, you had a phone call, someone wanted to go to rehab for 1 week. Yeah. And you're like, oh, he wants to go to rehab for 1 week. And I'm sat there thinking about that. Rehab for 1 week?
Yeah. And I think this is the one of the things people don't understand, especially families and even the addicts sometimes. They think going in there getting detox is going to fix them. But it's not the case. And then having to tell them that I believe even 28 days isn't enough. But because of the financial implications for some families, they just, the family I spoke to earlier, when I told her what the cost is going to be, it was like, they couldn't afford
expensive.
it. Yeah.
We don't. When we look at funding, we say 12 weeks minimum.
Yeah.
And still, some people who have changed, everything's changed so much. When I talk about that kind of isolation and just getting back kind of basic day-to-day life skills, after a couple of months, they're still finding their feet. And until they're comfortable, then they're not going to do that kind of treatment that does make you uncomfortable, to create change. So personally,
No,
I
I
wouldn't
agree with
say
you.
28.
20 is not enough. Is
That's
it?
that's a long detox,
Yeah,
in my
100%.
eyes.
Yeah.
So what would be the ideal situation, or how would it work from start to finish for you?
Ideally.
Yeah, ideally, I'm saying.
Yeah, ideally, people are engaged in treatment. They're engaged really well with their recovery worker. They're going to mutual aid so they can get a feel for talking in groups. Because what people need to realise is, I think sometimes there's a misconception that rehab's like, this one-to-one counselling, and it's not. It's group therapy.
Yeah.
So we do have independent counsellors that go in and say if there is a dual diagnosis need, so there's mental health to support as well, they can have those appointments additionally, but primarily from Turning Point, it's substance use and it's group. So ideally, I would like somebody that's experienced some of that first for them, so it's not so much of a shock. Then they get referred into the rehab team.
Yeah.
We go through the panel, get the 12 weeks. We look, because we've got about 17 different rehabs on our framework, so they're all CQC registered.
Yeah.
This is why we only use certain ones, because we're responsible for who we're referring into, and that can be a bit unsettling, and some people don't know where they're referring into.
So how long is the process then from start to if someone contacted you today, and maybe when they actually get that, as long as they go through the process like you say, even if they're on a reduction plan, etc.
If
everything goes like you say.
Yeah, if everything's going, they're engaging as and they're motivated, I would say average three months.
3 months.
But then I hate giving time scales.
No.
and I'll tell you the reason why. And I get why. If it was me, I'd want to know, 100%. Yeah. But then we can have, a couple of times we've had a COVID outbreak in detox, and then that will change everything. Yeah. And sometimes, depending on the rehab that they're going, the wait, Dilesh knows because he's done this work, the wait can vary so much, can't it? And then it's the battle of, do we try and encourage them to wait because we think this rehab's really going to be good for their individual needs, but ultimately it's not. We're not telling you, this has to be, a decision you make together, or are we just jumping on one where the wait times are shorter, which might not necessarily
be the right one.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I'm aware of. So when we're looking at the rehabs, them 17 rehabs, they're not just a rehab where you just throw somebody in there all the same. They all have a different purpose. I know we talk about Amy quite a lot, and she went to a trauma-informed rehab, but there's also a lot more different styles of rehab, and it's about choosing the right rehab, because I'm guessing the people we speak to, they just see it as rehab. And when we speak to them, I want them in rehab. They need to go to rehab now, but each individual person needs work doing beforehand, and to look quite deep of which rehab will be ideal for the person. Because I know 12-step is a big key for you. That works really well for you, and trauma-informed works really well for Amy, but there is a big selection of rehabs, isn't there? So if I was to look at rehab, what sort of options of rehabs are there available that we have?
Well, we've always got the choice of 12-step and therapeutic community. And like what you say, 12-step, when it works for people, seems to really work for people. But when people don't want it, they don't want it at all. But most rehabs now, even if they offer a 12-step approach, will still offer a therapeutic community, which is kind of person-centred. It's similar to the work that Turning Point do. It will be care plan-based, it will be reviewing goals, all that kind of thing. But then we do have other ones. We have female-only, which we do get quite a lot of demand for, especially if there's been any kind of like domestic violence. We do have male-only as well. We also have... So rehabs, because of the environment, it's difficult for them to take people in that might have an offending history, because it's a communal area at the end of the day, and they're responsible for everybody in there. So some of them which we know from working with them are really quite strict. You've got anything and they're not going in. But we do have a rehab specifically that will work with ex-offenders, because we know that that's a need as well. But I think it's also getting to know the different rehabs. So I know some who are very structured and it's a bit more rigid. And some people thrive off that. But then you've got ones that are a bit more gentler, aren't they, and a bit slower pace, and some people thrive off that. But once you've worked with these people, when you're working with a service user, you kind of have ones in your mind, don't you, of where you want to send them. But also then we do, if somebody has got a dual diagnosis, then that's something that we need to incorporate as well, because some rehabs will say, well, that's not really something that we can manage. So we've got specific places that we will pay additionally for to support that. But it's important to remember that our funding is for substance misuse, so it's not somebody that has mental illness that other people might not know what to do with. So they say Turning Point, put them into rehab. Well, they support the mental health, but primarily the work is for the substance use. And we have a bit of a battle on that.
I was just going to say, it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's very difficult because, sometimes people think that they have some kind of mental health diagnosis, but because of the level of substance use, people, the mental health team are going, well, how do we know what's what? How do we know what's the substance and what's... So
you have to eliminate the substance before you can diagnose them.
Exactly.
But it's also like, I think recovery is very personal to everyone, and like you say, if, one works for one, and it's about knowing that person, isn't it? And that's probably some of the work you do beforehand, isn't it?
We used to do that a lot, so it's about spending a lot of time with that service user that's referred for rehab and going through a full assessment of trying to find out what that person's need is. Because sometimes it's so easy just to pick a rehab and just go on time, because this one hasn't got a big waiting list, this person's eager to get in. However, that could be the wrong rehab for that person. And I've witnessed it so many times where you sort of trying to push for a certain rehab, but that service user doesn't want to go because they're focusing just on time. And then they go into rehab, and then you get a phone call a few days after they've been in there, and they're like, I'm ready to leave.
This isn't for me.
And that sort of reflects back to what I wanted to talk about, because you must have some great success stories. You must have some really, really good stories to sort of talk about, and what we've seen through people, what they're doing now. And there's a lot of people working at Turning Point that have been through the whole system. So I'm just sort of focused. I'd like to know a couple of your stories that you really, really makes you realise this is why I do this job.
Well, I'm at a nice stage of the process, aren't I, at the end of the day, because I'm at rehab stage. So, I'm not really dealing with, the instant kind of chaos to it, if you like. But we've had people that it's just been, that it's just changed their life in so many ways. But it's the ripple effect, isn't it? And it's like not just, the substance use has gone now. It's like the substance use has gone, the confidence is gone. They're seeing the children have got a parent back. And that's huge. And confidence, and the amount of people now for Turning Point, which is why I do love Turning Point, that come back as volunteers, like Alni. We've got another couple that have just gone for the peer mentor group, and like people for the supported housing have come through that pathway and now work for Turning Point. And I think because you can see that through Turning Point, it's brilliant for people to see, isn't it? And literally come out. Or some people have gone in, with good jobs and all the rest of it, and literally broken down to nothing, and a year later they're back. And that's for me personally, obviously it's different for everybody. I think the reconnection with family is massive. Especially for the children that for a period of time have not been allowed to see their parent for whatever reason, safeguarding, all the rest of it. That's still very difficult on the child and the adult, isn't it? And one case that I've got recently, I actually went to court for because she was pregnant, and they were saying under these circumstances, there's no way she's keeping baby. She's trying, it wasn't enough for so because she couldn't do it on her own.
Yeah.
She needed more help. So whenever there's anybody like that's pregnancy, we prioritise it anyway because it's risk. We can get people in. We don't have fast track. I hate that word. We don't have a fast track process. But when there's stuff like pregnancy, we can get like mothers in really quite quickly to be detoxed. They then asked if we could go to court and explain what we could offer. And we've got a specialist family unit, Trevi House it's called, that we use. And so they have somebody looking after the baby in the day because mum needs treatment.
Yeah.
But then they have like all the parenting stuff in between. They get to live together. It can be monitored while they're in there, and they're doing fantastically well. And if it wouldn't, but if they hadn't had these options of detox and rehab, detox wouldn't have been enough.
No.
There wouldn't have been sustained change there. So you look at that, and you've kept mum and baby together,
yeah.
and that's just massive.
Enormous, isn't it?
It's massive.
Yeah.
Whereas what would have happened in that case is they would have been in the community, would have continued doing what they would have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at birth, the child would have been removed.
Immediately.
And this rehab opportunities allowed that mum to be with the child from birth and progress. So yeah, it's huge.
But having the safety measure, because there was things mum needed to work on.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't had the safety measure of knowing she was going to be in a specialist residential unit, not that I would have made a decision anyway, because I'm not, that professional to make that decision. That's not my field. But I wouldn't have wanted to say, yes, this newborn baby's going to be completely safe. So because we've got these options and we've got all those professionals working, and they're thriving. And so it's amazing when you can get stuff like that.
So, Amy, Dilesh asked, it's a good question I was to ask, but I'm going to ask you a bit of a trickier one or harder one.
Okay.
We often, the Seat Recovery Network, when families ask and you tell them what it's going to cost, because a lot of them want to pay privately, and a lot of them ask, what's the success rate of rehab?
For us,
not just for you, maybe overall, or just for you.
Yeah,
then,
so I wouldn't know. So all different rehabs will do their own success rate.
Yeah.
But the last report I did for Turning Point, we were about, I think it was 74% success rate.
Yeah.
Which is really high as an area, but that's because we put the prep in.
Yeah.
And rehabs will say, and detox say, we know where they come from.
And how is that success rate measured? How is that 74% measured?
It's literally on exit at the minute.
Okay.
So if they come back to us, we only measure. So we pick. See, that's something else we do.
Are you saying 74% complete that 3 months?
Rehab, yeah.
Yeah, rehab.
Yeah, or completed what they want to complete in rehab and abstinent. And some people might say, I'm coming out 2 weeks early because I'm in a good place. I've got something lined up. So that's what we would say was a success.
Okay.
We haven't done stuff in terms of if people are coming back in, which is possible. But at that point, what we do is when we send someone to rehab, other areas will shut that file now and say, right, they're in your care. And what was happening is people coming back to Leicester with nobody picking them up. So you've gone from a really intense environment where you know what you're eating, you're doing every day with people, to potentially flat on your own.
Yeah. And that's another one, isn't it? The aftercare.
Yeah.
And that's where you 74% on completion, but then there's no measuring the aftercare, is there?
No. Not at the moment. There will be. There's always some, there'll be a report that they weren't doing. But as it stands, I couldn't tell you what they were.
Hopefully this podcast will get Amy to do more work to get them stats. So I'm aiming to...
Why did I come?
That's what he's trying to do, isn't he? He's trying to get you to do more work. He's getting you back now.
Yeah, I know. He's got evidence.
Forced all that on me, now it's time to turn it around. But, and I think,
friends.
But there's also the option of just detox only. And I think we do see this a lot. We get a lot of people saying rehab. They're going to rehab for the week. They're going for rehab for the week. But there is also the option of detox only that does work well too. So it isn't just saying that rehab is the only option, because we do have people who have different lifestyles and stages of their life where it could just be 2 weeks in detox with treatment.
But I think a lot of people do get that confused, that 1 week. I think I don't think they mean rehab. They
mean detox.
Detox, yeah. So because a lot of people just don't understand it. I mean, you've explained it really well, and hopefully some of the viewers and the listeners will understand that a bit more, what rehab is.
Yeah, because we detox a lot of people.
Yeah.
And like I say, there's so many options now. It's not this hard. You can say, oh, I'm struggling to stop my heroin and crack use, but I'm not ready to come off my 5-step zone. Well, okay, because that's going to put you at a much safer place, and we want that. If we have to increase that 5-step zone, it's safer for us to do that and get you steady than you taking whatever, in the community. So we can look at doing that. Or some people who tend to be, very successful from detox is they've really put the work in the community, and it's just that last little bit, that tiny bit, and that that's could be that they need some support psychologically with that as well, because I can't speak for them on that, but even if it is, then if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do, because there is the psychosocial stuff. There's 3 groups a day in detox, ran every day. There's a gym, obviously Dear Albert go in, there's lots of holistic therapies, so you don't have to engage in those, it depends how you're feeling, but having that support system around you or being on your own, I can see why people would want to do that detox for that last part.
Yeah. I think for me as well, I think Jas touched upon it where they said aftercare, because there were so many people. None of our rehabs are local, are they? There seems to be, I think...
Stroud's our closest.
Stroud our closest. I think we had a close one before, but it is quite far out, and we also offer the opportunity of relocating. And that was some of the best work that I think we did. When we actually go into do the rehab work, they go into rehab where they do the 12 to 24 weeks in rehab, and then they go to the aftercare house, and then they follow up their treatment in a new location, starting fresh. As well as relocating, what are the other options of aftercare, that turning point or we support? What are the aftercare support?
See, what we do now is, like I say, we used to just shut that case down and that was it. So now we will keep it open and we'll monitor. We get progress reports from the rehab. And also that keeps the communication open from the service user as well. If there's something that's not right, we will look into it. That this is a two-way thing. It's not, it's making sure the service user is okay, and also the rehab's doing what they've said that they will provide, because that's what our contract says. So what happens now is we pick people back up in the community, and it's a judgment call, isn't it? So they can either stay with their recovery worker for a period of time, which isn't ideal, because we kind of want to keep pushing forward, not just drop back into sitting at turning point. And then we've got our aftercare package with Dear Albert, which is 6 months. So they would go to Dear Albert, but if they want to continue to do aftercare, then they can go voluntary. But that is our next feed in.
Because it's what we talk about again. I keep looking at. We talk about this again, where we have so many people going into rehab or detox, whatever they call it, for a week or two, where families pay thousands, ridiculous amounts. But then they come out into the community and then relapse within a very short period of time. It happens quite a lot with what we see. So it's good to actually see there's offers available. And I think even we're talking about the communities we talk to, there's also the Seek Recovery Network for referrals in for support. And this is, everyone thinks the rehab is a miracle cure. Everyone thinks if we send the child or daughter or son or brother or whoever it is to rehab, this is going to fix it. But there's a lot more to do.
No, absolutely. And I think, like you said, some families just think sending them to rehab, they'll even think it's almost like a magic pill. 28 days they're going to come back and everything's... And I think some of them are devastated and heartbroken, when it doesn't work. Some don't even make it the 28 days, they'll be back home, within days. And it's heartbreaking for some of them. But we do say, look, especially in Leicester now, say, right, if people contact the Seek Recovery Network, and we say, right, I mean, that's how Annie got into treatment. It was through the Seek Recovery Net initially. And I think this is a better option. I know they've got a bit of a wait, but there is a process and there is a reason for that process. But you've got more chance of succeeding with the 3 months. And
they're getting that support while they do it. They're getting those groups, they're getting those interventions while they do it. But I can understand why families do that. It's a desperation thing, isn't it? Of course.
Yeah.
And like, you know, if you're in the same position, and I'd probably be thinking, well, I want them in rehab the next day. But the problem is if these rehabs, I'm not going to mention any names, if these rehabs aren't governed by anybody, how do we know how safe it? You know, I've heard of, and this is only hearsay, of people still now offering detox that aren't medicated. That's, for one, it's unsafe.
It's insane.
It's insane. And for two, it's horrible, isn't it? Like, what a horrible experience when you're feeling vulnerable anyway, and then you think you're going to go into a rehab and be steady and fine, and it's scary.
I mean, Amy, if you know, with the Asian community, do you get many people come into Turning Point that are taking advantage of the rehabs or even treatment?
We have had, because I can only talk about my rehab figures, to be honest, because I don't hold a caseload, but we have had quite a lot of people from the Asian community, city, going to rehab, not so much county. But I think that, like, you talked about doing some work on it before, didn't you?
Yep.
And to find out more, get more feedback.
Yes, I can talk about this. So I can go through an experience when I was working where we had a young chap, Muslim guy, wanted to go in. He wanted his own room in somewhere so he can pray, and he had to wait almost a year. This was looking a few years back to get him somewhere that was suitable. So the following and the backup of that is what I did is I contacted every single rehab we had on our list, and there were 3 questions. And the question is, what do you do to support anybody's cultural food needs? So if somebody's halal, do you support that?
Yeah.
If somebody eat certain foods, do you support that? All of them said yes, which was great. And then the other one was, what do you support if English wasn't the first language? Which a lot of them was a bit baffled by. They didn't know how to respond to that.
It's not particularly strong,
it's not something that is hugely available for somebody in their first language. However, some rehabs did say that if they have somebody in, if they have a worker or a peer that speaks that language, they will be willing to support. And then the other one, which was, do you have a multi-faith room? And all of them was no. And this was about 2 years ago, and it was great to see that we had a recent chart, and we've worked very closely to make sure that we work with the rehabs that are now suitable. So most of the rehabs that we work with now are suitable and do have multi-faith rooms. They do have language line and interpretation offers, and they also provide food options for dietary requirements and for religious and ethical needs. So there has been a big change on that. So it's about getting this information out so more people can then say, okay, there is more.
But I mean, this is why this is important, isn't it? It's just because a lot of people won't be aware of that. And these are some of the fears, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, will I get my appropriate food needs? Will I get the multi-faith room? And these are all really important for some people. And going into, like, it's going to add to the trauma, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, if there's a language barrier, then how are you going to feel in a group?
Yeah.
I know how I would feel in a group if I didn't understand that immediately you're going to feel at a disadvantage, aren't you? And I think there has been a lot of change, and they're really good changes, but I think they could, for rehabs, not for us, but for rehabs, I think they could do a bit more work around language with inclusivity, because that I just can't, that must be really difficult.
Yeah. More work for you to add onto your list, Amy. You can add language. And
I'm batting that one straight back.
But yeah, there can be more, and we did talk. We have spoken a lot on rehab, and I think the idea is you just get into treatment, get talking to your recovery worker about the options that are available. That's detox or rehab, and then go with the process. It may take time. However, it's working on what the need is right now. And if there's a need right now that you're drinking a litre bottle of vodka, or if you're taking heroin, it's a litre bottle of vodka, it's less how do we reduce that? If you're using heroin, it's how do we get you prescribed on methadone? It's about just taking that first step of entering into treatment, and that's taking your first step of getting to rehab.
And seeing rehab is part of your treatment. It's not treatment.
Yeah.
And also the things that we're doing in this wait, it shouldn't almost be seen as a wait, it's prep.
Yeah.
Like, does this person need mental health support? You know, SUMH, our mental health team, now that we've got recovery workers that can offer additional support, can we be looking at that? What health needs are there? Do we need a liver function test? Are they well enough to go to rehab? Because rehab will cater for a lot of things, but they're not hospital care. They can't offer that level of care. Sorry, I've done it again. But keep hitting the microphone. But also, that could be a target, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Let's focus on your health, your physical health as well, so you're well enough. So it all should be part of the process.
And I think this is why there's a lot of fears,
Yeah.
you know, especially from some of the Asian community. There's a lot, and I think the more we talk about this, it will put people at ease. And I think hopefully this podcast will put some people at ease going into treatment.
And I talk as rehab. I love a stupid analogy, as most people would know. It's like I look at rehab as an option. If you have a tree that has no sunlight and rain, it's not going to grow.
Yeah.
It's not going to grow. However, if you think I'm going to dig this tree up and put it to somewhere and give it all the sunlight and rain it requires, it will start to flourish. It will start to grow. At least it will start to develop again. However, after 12 weeks or 6 months or 3 weeks of being there, you're going to dig it up and put it back in the first place it come from. Without the sunlight and rain, it's going back to the old ways. It's going to go back to wilting away and falling apart. So it's about, this process is about putting the work in and getting yourself a little bit of sunlight, getting yourself a little bit of rain, getting yourself a little bit of love, getting yourself a little bit of affection. So when you leave rehab again and come back here, you're prepared to start growing.
But then, but that's where the aftercare is essential as well. Well, that's where the love and the compassion and the warmth all comes into it as well. Is the aftercare package as well. And unfortunately, if you're going to leave and it just isn't there, is it, the aftercare?
Well,
and I think that, for me, that is crucial.
Yeah, I think this is why I really encourage people to take the aftercare at the rehab, because these resettlement houses are brilliant, because it's a stepping stone. Rather than they go from nothing to everything, from everything to nothing, bang.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, now you're going into supported housing. So you'll be with peers that you've probably spent a lot of time with anyway. So you're very supportive. You've still got those support sessions there, but you're given that bit more of independence and empowerment, and you need to start making your own decisions now and your own choices, but still in a relatively safe environment. If you can do that and then kind of make sure the aftercare's here for when you get back, then it's nicer steps than just
more structured, isn't it?
Yeah. So we always try and encourage it, don't we? It's a resettlement house all the way.
Amy, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I think it's given the viewers and the listeners a really good insight in how to get into treatment, rehab, detox, and I think we need to continue this dialogue, this conversation, because maybe in another few months' time someone's going to need this, and it's difficult for us, the Seek Recovery Network or other community-based charity services providing this, to get that message across, because we don't always have the knowledge. Like you do, and this is why it's important for us, Seek Recovery Network, to work with Turning Point. For you're the experts in this, and so we need to tap into your resources if our community is gonna want to go into treatment.
And I will say, like, as much as we joke, me and Dilesh we want to help people, and we are approachable. So if there was anyone specifically wanted to talk about, then we're happy to just go through that case individually, because if you don't do it all the time, you don't know, do you? So and we'll be able to go straight away, well, probably look at A, B and C, and then but that's still starting the process in a way.
I think it sort of leaves me with two questions. I think the first one is, what's your advice for anybody seeking rehab at the moment?
Well, it's got to be through you've got to be engaged with Turning Point. But what I would say is, if you're just going into Turning Point and you want maybe we're not going to look at rehab straight away, but if you go in and go, this is my aim, and would I be able to get more information? Because I think this is where we fall down a bit sometimes. People are going in, they're going to assess, they're going to a recovery worker, and not all recovery workers know everything about rehab and detox, because they're not doing it all the time. It's more specialist, they're doing kind of more of the day-to-day treatment. So it's important for them to say, could I speak to someone? Could I have an information session? Because the rehab team are willing to do that, but sometimes it's getting lost. They're getting disheartened because they're saying, well, is this a consideration at all? Whereas I can get someone from the rehab team to have a word with them and say, look, you've started this is what we'd like to see, we'll review it in a month, see where you are, and straight away that's going to make them feel that they're on the path rather than this endless kind of treatment, if you know what I mean.
So basically, if you want rehab, talk about it. Make it as a part of your journey, discuss it, keep asking for it. Which leads me on to my final question.
Yeah.
With the podcast being called Under the Influence, what would you say you're under the influence of today?
Under the influence of heat.
It's far too much heat.
Does that mean you're loving it or hating it?
Wow, I love it if I'm not working in it.
Yeah.
I'm one of these people that can just sit in it, but I'm not very good when I'm working. That's the first thing I said when I came up. I was like, I'm so hot.
It's nice and cool in here, though, isn't it?
Yeah. So
But now we're going to allow you to leave and hit the heat. And it's been a pleasure,
Tell you
Amy.
about it.
We'll get this out and look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for
Amy.
having me.
Thank you, Amy.
Cheers.